My name is Matthias. I work at a little company called Travis CI, and today I want to talk a little bit about how we built and scaled up a distributed and inclusive team. A lot of this talk came out of feedback from my team. I sent out a survey leading up to this, so you'll hear first-hand stories of what we're doing to run and maintain a distributed team, and you'll also be hearing stories about what we're doing to make sure that all of these people feel included in what we're building. So you probably know Travis CI from something like this, and you'll see those all over GitHub. It's a continuous integration platform, very, very popular with open source projects. And we're a German-based company, and a lot of, thank you. Our business is rooted in Germany, and quite a few of the founders are from Germany as well. We have one New Zealander amongst the founders as well. So you'll notice differences in this talk, and they will be cultural. And the interesting part of that is at the core of what a distributed team is and the kind of challenges that you run to, especially when you have distributed teams that go beyond a single country. So the United States is pretty big. But as soon as you leave it, interesting things happen when cultures come together. Some of the perspectives I'll be talking about are rooted in us being a European and German business. So I apologize for those up front, but I'm happy to talk about these afterwards because there's interesting differences in particular between work cultures, but even cultural backgrounds of people. Even though Europe and the US, for example, are both have a Western culture, there's still very, very interesting but subtle differences that I want to talk about today. And this is also what I'll be focusing on in this talk. I'll be focusing on differences between the US and Europe/Germany because it can be a very stark contrast in a certain way. And the examples that I'm talking about, they happen in different ways and different incarnations between different cultures. So they're just good examples to work off because they've also been an important part of the feedback I've gotten from the team. So our headquarters is located in Berlin, which is also where I'm from. And you haven't heard the story of Travis CI yet. It started out as an open source project in 2011. It was launched in February 2011 as a CI platform for open source projects. Had very small adoption. A couple of hundred projects were using it by the end of 2011. A couple of thousand by the end of 2012, and now we're a couple of 10,000 that are using it every day. It was originally developed and worked on by a very, very active open source community. So that's truly where our roots are. And open source is a good example and a good model in a lot of ways to build a distributed team on. As a business, we're bootstrapped, and the company was officially created in early 2012 because people were wanting to use the same thing that we have for open source. They wanted to use that for their internal projects as well. And from the very get-go, we worked in a very distributed fashion. As I said, one of the early builders of Travis CI were someone from Germany and someone in New Zealand. So from the very early days, we had these interesting time zone problems, and time zone problems are usually, the most interesting ones. And we've tried to stick with those. It hasn't always worked out well, but we're getting back there. One thing I want to quickly talk about is the name. So everyone know Bob the Builder? Okay, more people should know Bob the Builder. Cool. So it's a kind of cartoon character for kids, and one of the early versions of Travis CI were using a tool called Bob, which was effectively used to run a build in the build environment. And Bob has a tractor called Travis. So, eventually the name Travis CI came about, and it was supposed to be temporary, but it's kind of stuck. Still called Travis CI. So at this point, we have 40 builders in our company, and they're currently residing in 9 different countries. And there's a lot in there, and they're spanning 9 different time zones. Effectively, these are our main time zones at the moment, the East Coast, West Coast, and Europe. Occasionally, though, we have interesting things happen where we cover a lot more time zones. So the one extreme is the New Zealand time zone, and the other extreme is the Hawaiian time zone. That happened earlier this year, and it effectively led to 2 people on our team being almost at the exact same time of the day, but 2 different days apart. And we have a rule that says, don't deploy on Fridays or on the weekend. And then one of them can say, well, it's still Thursday over here. So there's interesting problems that come up with that. So out of that team, well, we have 10 different native languages. And in total, there are 15 different home countries. I'm always staggered by these numbers because it's still only 40 people. It's still a relatively small team. When we started building it out as a company and we started hiring our first people, we saw interesting things happen. We had a distribution that was fairly focused on Europe and Berlin in particular. And we had a couple of people over here in the US, was actually 2 in the very early stages, 2 to 3, depending on how people moved back and forth. And a couple of those, moved to Berlin because I wanted to be closer to the team. And over time, we realized we need to push again for a more remote team. First and foremost, because we have a really, really large customer base in the US. And we didn't feel like we could serve them well enough with every one of us being in Europe. So one of the goals for us to hire remote was to build out a team over here in the US. That team now is fairly big. There's quite a few of them here. And the other goal we're looking at was to increase the diversity in our team. In the early stages, we had far more men than women on our team, and we wanted to work on that. So this talk is about an inclusive team, and I want to talk about why this is important for diversity. And this, I'm going to quote my friend Jan Leonard, who just very recently put this up in a talk that he gave. To have diversity, you need to build an inclusive company culture. You cannot have diversity when you don't think about all the people that work in your company and try to include as many of them as possible. And I would extend that a little bit. I would also say that an inclusive company culture is required if you have an asynchronous or distributed team and you want to increase the diversity in your company. So of our team, currently we have 52% remote. The other work, there's a couple of that work from the Berlin office. Not everyone is required to work from the Berlin office. And many people just work from home even though they're in Berlin. Because an office can still be a big distraction. So neither is everyone actually required to come into the office. It's handy for some, it's not as handy for others. It's just, basically everyone is free to structure the day however they like. And where we're also at now is that we have 50% women on our team. And of those, we have 50% that work in engineering. And this is like a direct result of the work that we've done in the last. Thank you. That's a direct result of the work that we've done in the last 2 years. And that's basically what I want to talk about today. So I want to talk about 3 challenges when it comes to both distributed and inclusive team. The first one is a very obvious one, it's communication. Where you're not in the same office, interesting things happen, and there's interesting things you need to take into account. And I want to talk a little bit about those. The second one is the different cultural backgrounds. As I said, we have 15 home countries, and people currently residing in 9 different countries with 10 different native languages. That leads to, well, interesting things that come up, but they're things that we're dealing with. I want to talk about those as well. And the last one is how building an inclusive culture affects the company culture as a whole. So I want to start with communication. We're using we're using a good set of tools, but the most important ones that we're using are GitHub and Slack. So I want to focus a little bit on each because we use a couple of other tools. We use Trello, we use Zoom and Google Hangouts for video communication, for face-to-face chats. We use Google Docs here and there, and we use Screen Hero for screen sharing. Overall, we use very little email, which wasn't effectively by design. It just happened because a lot of stuff happens either in GitHub or in chat. So we're using Slack as, I think in a lot of ways as every other team would use it for day-to-day communication where the teams organize their own work. Some teams do remote stand-ups. It's a lot easier to do those in written form than it is to have people across different time zones show up at a reasonably good time of day and make sure that everyone actually can do that, especially when it's spanning 9 different time zones. Slack, we use it also heavily for chat ops, and I want to talk a little bit about that. and for incident response. Those have become very interesting use cases of what we're doing with it and how that affects working in a distributed team. From the ChatOps perspective, all of our deploys, we run a lot of our stuff on Heroku. All of our deploys happen in Slack. And in Slack, everyone can deploy. The ability to deploy for everyone on the team helps increase both visibility of what's going on, of what's going out to production or to staging, but it also removes entrance barriers for new developers and for junior developers in particular. Like when you join a new team, you don't have to learn any complex workflows, and as a junior developer, you also don't. That means as a junior developer, there's a good chance that you can deploy something to production in your first week because of these lowered entrance barriers. We use a lot more in terms of ChatOps of what we do with it, but the more interesting part is our incident response channel. What's going on in there, like every time we get an alert or there's a production outage, the team converges into that channel for response. The great thing about this channel is that there's an open interaction between our engineers and the customer support team. So everyone works together in making sure that everyone from our customers is in the loop and gets updates. That also includes updating the status page. It used to be done from Slack as well, but it's now more done from the tool that we're using for that. But you can still see in that channel what the updates have been to our status page. And with bigger outages, the team switched to Google Hangouts for more visual communication, which also helps, while still keeping everyone in the loop in chat. And the great thing is, like, having this visibility and having everyone in that channel means that everyone can collaborate and does collaborate to keep our customers up to date. After an outage was fixed, a lot of our engineers hop on and also send responses out to customers. For paging, we still use a good old mechanisms. There's this guy, he's very big into beepers. So we still get pages via phones. But one thing we recently started doing is to rework our on-call rotation, and specifically to take location into account. So there's a good combination of, well, there's Europeans available at this time of day, so this is when their shift is. And there's US employees available on that part of the world, or American employees. And it doesn't require everyone to be available all the time, because we have people who are awake at a certain amount of day. And especially during on-call, sleep is more important than anything else. And we haven't rolled this out yet, but we're working on finishing this up. And I'm very happy about that. And speaking about incident response and inclusive culture, one thing that we set out to have from the very early days of our company was to have a blameless culture. Because nobody benefits from blaming people for mistakes or for production outages. Failures happen in complex systems, and Travis CI is a fairly complex system. There's a lot of moving parts involved. And gambles and mistakes are a normal part of business. And it's okay to make those. And the other part of that is it's very easy to put a problem that happened onto a single person. But in complex systems, and that includes technology and businesses and organizations, you usually have more than one contributing factor. There's no such thing as a root cause. There's always multiple things coming together, compounding into whatever happens. And the good part about a blameless culture is that it fosters learning. And continuous improvement is one of our company values. So we cannot have learning when we focus on mistakes that single people on the team make. So the other part I want to talk about is GitHub. Our roots are in open source. Travis and I started out as a GitHub project. And so we, to this day, organize a lot of things around GitHub and GitHub issues in particular. And also, most of our development happens out in the open because, well, Travis CI is still at the very core an open source project. A lot of our components are open source, so you can follow along a lot of the development that happens across all the repos that we have available as open source. In addition to that, we use internal issue tracking to manage backlogs, to manage work in progress, and a couple of other things. So time zone specific is an interesting one because we now have teams that work in European time zones, but also in American time zones that do handoff from one time zone to the other, and that leads to an interesting pinball effect. Like someone finishes a piece of work, documents what they finished, and it gets picked up in the other time zone. It's pretty neat. What we've also done is we're using GitHub issues for onboarding new employees. Remote people on our team, they can come to the Berlin office for onboarding, but that's optional. We fly everyone in if they would like to, but not everyone is able to do that. So the first weeks when someone joins the team, they work with their team specifically, and after that, we put them into customer support rotation. That happens usually remote and has a long history at Travis CI, because in our company, pretty much everyone does customer support. And everyone on our team should feel the customer's pain, and customer support is just a key part of our company and our product. And it helps bring a lot of visibility of what our customers are experiencing to everyone on the team. We're also using GitHub issues to book travel, like conference tickets in particular, conference flights, hotels. Organizing 11 people to come here has caused a very, very big GitHub issue thread in our conferences repository. We also do procurement via GitHub issues. Like whenever someone has a book, whenever someone wants a book, they file an issue. It's usually bought, as a Kindle book or as a printed book, and that same is true for coffee or tea subscriptions, which we make available to our remote employees. And the book allowance is one of the few perks that we give out in the company. So everyone can basically buy as many books as they would like, because we like people to learn. And the last thing we do is we have an issue tracker for our office. So when we have plans, when we need plans in the office, or when we need new toilet paper even, there's an issue that gets filed here, and someone will buy the toilet paper. So the neat thing about GitHub issues and having most, if not all, of the repositories that we have available to everyone is that it creates a lot of visibility. So people can basically opt into what they're interested in. I want to get updated about what's happening with our office. I want to get updated on new conference things. And that is, to me, that kind of visibility to me is a cornerstone to inclusive communication, which remote teams have to work a lot harder on to make sure that everyone feels included. It requires a lot more effort than just doing a lot of face-to-face chats, which are very just normal in an office, to make sure that everyone stays in the loop. When face-to-face chats happen, and they do happen, especially in the office, but also via video, they do need to be translated into written form to make sure that other people can read whatever came out of that call or discussion. And it doesn't work effectively all the time in our team yet, but that's something we're working on. And overall, distributed teams need to accept that there's a Taxon communication. Not everything can be instant. Things need to be asynchronous, and that can be, it can be a change. When you have a question or when you have an issue, there's not always going to be someone around to answer that question immediately. So there can be lags or delays in feedback on pull requests or feedback, on written form. And feedback in writing generally requires a lot more work and effort than giving feedback on something someone is working on face-to-face or in oral form. And the thing is that this is completely normal in open source projects, where where we're coming from, where like a ton of projects are using GitHub for. And why is it not normal in companies? One of the questions I would like to leave you with today. So the general rule for distributed teams is that if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. Any decision that happened face-to-face or happened between two people that were just talking about it, and that decision is not documented anymore, it probably happened, but not enough people know about it most of the time. And we use Google Docs a lot to collaborate around written text, but we also use GitHub pull requests to do the same. So like our blog, for example, is a GitHub repo, gets deployed to Heroku via Travis, and that allows interesting collaborations even around text about simple things, and doing that out in the open. So as part of that feedback survey, I got an interesting summary of this, of what is going on with communication in distributed teams. Effectively, less oral communication means you have more accidental documentation. Because more things are tracked in Slack channels or GitHub issues, they're already written down, which is definitely a benefit, and they're a lot easier to turn into docs than having conversations. Over the last 2 years, we've improved our internal documentation a lot, in part based on accidental documentation, but it's still not enough. And if it's not channeled enough, this can lead to a lot of scattered documentation as well. And lots of GitHub repositories with lots of issues that are not always easy to, it's not always easy to find stuff in there. And one thing to work on that, and that we started this year, is to have a builder's manual, which is our internal documentation. We've had a lot of active wikis over GitHub repos, and we started converging all of them into a single source of truth, which includes stuff like our company values and our product roadmap, bits about our culture, security, engineering, and all that kind of thing. Because even distributed teams need centralized documentation. If everyone knows where they can find everything that's going on in the company, it will be a lot easier for people to figure out what they need to do, why are people doing what, and what is overall going on in the company. The other interesting GitHub repo that we're using is called How We Work. And that is, I look at it as our culture repo. This is, in this repo, we talk about things that are going on in the company, or what can we improve in our company, changes in our development workflow, or we have discussions around cultural things or processes, workflows. For example, we had a discussion about opening salaries. We had discussions about code of conducts for both internal and for open source projects. We had discussions about improving our on-call rotation. And that leads to interesting things, like the discussion about our team values. As you can see, it started, it started last year, 2015, and I started this discussion, and a lot happened in that. I basically closed this issue just earlier this year, and this is like this whole discussion has 70 comments. It was like an interesting progression of, well, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? So there was lots of opinion sharing. There's like both existing and new employees shared their opinions. Well, this is how I view our values, and this is this is how I view our values. And new employees were saying, well, yeah, this actually sums up our values pretty well. This was a great example for what Red Hat has called inclusive decision making, which effectively means if you want to make a decision, you make sure that you get as much feedback from your team as possible before you end up making that decision. And inclusive decision making in particular benefits a lot from having many and diverse perspectives. And like we do that in several ways. Some people send out surveys. It's like, I'm working on this thing, and like I have a couple of questions that I would like to have answered from as many people on the team as possible to make sure that I can take as many things into account, or that I can take all of the team's perspectives into account. And then people start building whatever the end result is supposed to be based on that. Collect more feedback from the team, and eventually the decision is made, well, this is it. This is what we're doing. But usually what happens is this is not, the end result is not stuck. It's a version 1, we consider it a version 1.0, and effectively we keep iterating on it. The feedback cycles are a lot longer when it comes to cultural issues, but I still consider it something like continuous integration for company culture. Nothing in our company culture is fixed. As I said, it can take a lot longer to improve something because even implementation and feedback cycles are a lot longer, but everything is up for change and everything is evolving. And I want to give a few examples of that. We had a custom Slack emoji. We have a lot of those. We had a custom Slack emoji which was called freedom, and that was alias to the US flag, waving. That was like an internal meme where, we were just joking about traveling to the US, can you experience all the freedom? It was just an internal meme, and no offense in all of that. It was just, it was one of those things that developed in early stages, but didn't feel, you had to explain to people. And One of our employees someday turned that custom emoji into this. Because, and I quote, "Freedom isn't associated with a single nation, but with freedom struggles of all people." So that happened completely out of the blue. That's whatever employees just changed and let everyone know, well, I did this thing and here's why. And that was one of my proudest moments in the company in the recent month, when that little change happened, and because I set up this emoji. I set up this emoji and I was super happy that someone changed it into this. And the other part, this very recent one is, well, this is our Slack profile, and based on discussions and things that happened recently, one of our employees added a gender pronoun box. We have a lot of boxes now on our Slack profile, but this is a very recent addition, just to make sure that everyone can both set up and that everyone can find out what is a preferred pronoun that someone would like to have used when when someone else is referring to them, when someone else is talking to them. And so the important part of that is, and about also having inclusive cultures, that you need to empower everyone to be able to make those kinds of changes. Inclusiveness starts at the top, but everyone should be able to change the culture to be more inclusive. And what goes along with these memes is that scaling distributed culture in particular requires that you document it. These internal memes like the Freedom One or other things, I'm sure everyone here who works in a company can think of a meme or an acronym or a technical term that not everyone might know about. And that can be confusing to new employees, it can be confusing to junior employees in particular, and it can make them feel very included if they don't know what's being talked about. So we started documenting them in our internal documentation. This is an outline of the kind of custom Slack responses that we have. This is very specific about weather and also looking at cute things. But the entire thread goes a lot longer into why do we have a correction from guys into people or something else? So, and that is very important because it can be, especially to new employees, it can be confusing. Well, why am I being corrected? And when you document these kinds of little bits, even as little as they may seem, you can just point people to that and say, well, here's why. And at least they can get background. One of the definitely most interesting challenges of running a distributed team is distributed Facetime. Excuse me. We do a lot of our one-on-ones remote with a distributed team using Google Hangouts or Zoom. And to make sure that everyone actually sees everyone in regular intervals, we run a monthly all hands, which is, for me, usually an opportunity to talk in front of 40 silent faces, which is an interesting experience, but it's one thing where there's usually a lot of chatter in our Slack when this all hands is going on. And this is one of the few times where everyone sees everyone else from the team. So this always happens at an hour where we know everyone can, as many people as possible can join in. And this one happened during the Euro World Cup, as you can see at the top. So the other thing we recently started doing, which was also a change request effectively from one of our builders, was Friday Lightning Talks. So every 2 weeks, and for the purpose of sharing and learning more of what each of us is working on and what each of us is thinking of, we now have these bi-weekly talks where people can say, hey, I want to talk about this, and they have 15 minutes where they can talk in front of whoever wants to join in and listen to the talks. And that is very cool. That just started very recently, and I unfortunately haven't had time to join in on those yet, but I'm very much looking forward to that. And the last bit that we're doing is a company offsite. This is not a very special thing for any normal company, but for a distributed company, it's still very important and very valuable to get everyone on the team together at least once a year and have them hang out together, work together, learn together, and just have a good time. So we have ours coming up in a couple of weeks, and I'm very much looking forward to that. So one of the challenges I want to talk about is cultural diversity. As I said, we have people from very, very different countries, and that leads to challenges is the wrong word. It leads to learnings. We put it that way. And so someone from our team member, one of our team members put together in that survey that I put out, and to describe how distributed teams and diversity play together. And they said that distributed teams increase the chances of diversity due to having people from different cultures and backgrounds. It's like incredible definition of diversity in distributed or inclusive and distributed teams right there. And this is especially true when you hire beyond your own country. Now there's a lot of companies who are distributed who are distributed throughout the US or say throughout Europe, but as soon as you go beyond that, there's a lot more that you add to your team, and it's a great benefit. And I want to focus a little bit on two sides of that. One, the side of, as I mentioned earlier, Germans and the differences between German and US culture. So this is a German. So as you can see, Germans are, well, this is actually an Austrian, but it's close enough. Germans tend to be more reserved, maybe slightly awkward, I don't know. I'm a German, so maybe I'm awkward. We don't really small talk a lot, we're very direct. We just either tell you that if we don't like something, we'll tell you. If we disagree with something, we'll tell you. Whereas in the US, it's a lot more like this. Over here, you're a lot more enthusiastic about things, and you're also a lot more polite. And there was an interesting thing that happened just a couple of weeks ago, which I just want to outline as how these things are different. So I'm just going to leave this up because it's so good. We were at a leadership retreat a couple of weeks ago, and so we did a survey on something, and it was a team survey. And so there were a couple of questions, and these were the options. So it was basically, you could either select good, great, or needs improvement. So as Germans, we're like, well, this needs improvement. And then the answer, that was the answer to a lot of things, because it's we're engineers, we're German engineers, it's this can be a lot better. There's a lot more that we can do in this. And so the facilitator then said, wow, this looks really bad. Everything needs improvement. You should be at great, or at least at good at all of these things. And as Germans, we're like, well, if needs improvement is really the worst thing, then we actually need to scale like this. Needs improvement to Germans is more, it's in the middle. This is okay, but we can still work on it. And so our next survey is probably going to have more different options. So yeah, that's the German culture compared to the US in basically 4 slides. It's a lot more complicated than that, but yeah, that was an interesting experience. We now have a much better understanding what needs improvement means. It means really, really bad. The thing about the distributed communication and writing in particular is that tone and nuance can get easily lost because text doesn't convey emotions very well. And you can read things into it. You can say, well, this sounds really passive aggressive, or this person must be really upset. But there's a possibility that emotion is actually hidden in text, or that it can be interpreted into the text. And in addition to that, parsing language in real time, especially for non-native speakers, can be a real challenge. So there's a lot that can get lost in writing, and I'm pretty sure you had that moment when you were in a Slack channel and you were writing something and you saw that thing at the bottom which said several people are typing, which caused you probably a lot of stress saying, oh, I really need to get my answer out. It should really say several people are frantically typing, because that's usually what those people are doing. And so, again, someone from our team member switched Henlon's razor around and said, never attribute to malice or stupidity that which is adequately explained by a missing perspective. This is a perfect summary of written communication. You can read a lot of things into it, or you can, you can check, well, there's a lot of emotion in this, or this person must be really upset, or I'm really offended by what that person wrote. But usually, or in quite a few cases, it's a missing perspective. It's you don't fully know, you don't have the entire context of what that person might be thinking or experiencing or feeling at any given time. And the additional problem in there is that English is a very ambiguous language. I mean, even I get confused by how many different meanings a single word can have. English as a whole is our company language, and it always has been because we started out as an open source project. But if you're not a native speaker, meanings can get easily lost. If you haven't, watched a lot of Friends or these kinds of TV shows that teach us Europeans, the ways over here. Those meanings can get easily lost. Colloquialisms is not something that, in Europe we learn in school. I learned Oxford English in school, and it's like, well, this is the exact meaning of this word. There's no other meaning, and that's it. And especially as a native speaker, it's easy to interpret or read into things that non-native speakers write. Things that you're more aware of. That you're aware of that there's this other meaning of this word. Is this person not familiar with it? And it's a very good likelihood that as a non-native speaker, they're not. German, on the other hand, is very on point. We're really, really famous for compound words, and I have a long list of a good collection of compound words, and this is one of the shorter ones. And so one thing that has been established as a practice in our team is asking questions. It's okay to ask questions in our team, no matter what it is about. Like if you have a question about a certain part of our app or a code base or a production system, or if you think there's a certain meaning that some person might not be completely familiar with, you ask more questions, and it's okay to do that. Before they assume anything, double check. Double check and ask that person to verify if that, what you understood is actually what they were trying to say. A lot of the time, going back to the Hanlon's razor interpretation, a lot of the time they probably didn't. And as the last part, I want to talk a little bit about work culture. Because we're a German company and work cultures are different in interesting ways. Being a German company, we've extended European or German work benefits to everyone, which took getting used to for people who are not in the US. Not in Europe. Or not generally exposed to these kinds of work benefits. So building a company over different countries or even different continents can be very, very challenging in that way because all of these work cultures clash together and you need to figure out a way how to deal with them. So one example is Europeans take 2-week vacations easily, and they're just at the end of their, the day before they go on vacation, it's I'm out. Don't call me, don't email me, I'm not going to read it. Whereas in the US, it's a lot more common to take long weekends, take your phone, you check email. I will do an anonymous survey after this who still does those things. And there's other weird stuff that because shops are closed in Germany on Sundays, which confuses a lot of people who are visiting Germany. But that's an entirely different thing. So 2 years ago, we had what's considered here an unlimited vacation policy. Which we had it for very different reasons than it is usually used over here. We actually did want people to take vacations and not have to worry about how much they have to take. But 2 years ago, we figured out that it doesn't actually happen a lot as often as we would like. So instead, we mandated vacation. It's a very normal thing in Europe actually. You get 25 days per year in Germany, for example. And your employer has to go out of their way to make sure that you can actually take them. And so we changed it to that, and quite successfully so, I would say at this point. I actually want to run a little bit of data analysis on how we're actually doing this. But this is one of those examples where we took something that we know from European work culture, and rather than do different things in different countries, we said this is someone that everyone should be getting in the company. Because inclusive work culture doesn't just come from giving your people perks and great benefits. It comes from truly caring about them as human beings and acknowledging that there's a life outside of work. That's part of our company philosophy. The other example is salaries and cost of living. Even when you're hiring even if you're spreading out over the US, you have interesting differences. Especially between here and other parts of this country. And salaries in Europe are at very, very different levels than over here as well. So one thing we built, we started working on last year was a salary framework, which addresses location factors in different countries and even in different, subparts of the country, as well as normal market rates. And what we also build in addition to that is a career ladder to say, to give people an indication of effectively, how can I get a raise? But even more important than that, how can I personally grow in the company? What needs to happen? What do I need to do? What kind of barrier do I need to work on next to continue growing? And so our CTO, Konstantin, who's also around here, just recently gave a talk called How We Replace Salary Negotiations with a Sinatra App. And that's specifically about salary negotiations, because salary negotiations are still a very, very big problem when it comes to men versus women. So, summing up, we're not a remote-first company. It wasn't necessarily our official goal. It is one thing that we strive towards, but there's still a difference between, our Berlin HQ, because we have an HQ, we're actually extending the HQ because we hired a couple more people over there, and the remote employees. Occasionally, so people in the Berlin HQ sometimes get different kind of perks as people who work remote. Just as one example, we have a team lunch, which only happens once a week, but even that can make remote employees feel excluded. So, still trying to figure out how we're going to deal with that and how we're going to improve the situation as a whole. Speaking about distributed teams in general, your mileage may very well vary. All of this has worked for us, and distributed teams aren't really for everyone, but they can help you build a more inclusive and a more diverse company. That's the learning that we took away from this. And I want to thank you to my team because they've been incredible in giving me insight into actually coming up with this talk. Thank you.